Now, there's an oft-repeated saying. It goes, nothing changes if nothing changes. And not for the first time, Jamaicans find themselves parsing through a report from the Auditor General and recognizing that indeed nothing has changed because nothing has changed. Not for the first time, Mrs. Munroe-Ellis has cited multiple breaches of the country's procurement rules, inventory management, lines of authority. It's not the first time that we're seeing a report like that from her. Remember COVID? Remember that famous sitting in Parliament? She challenged the health ministry. You remember. Off the bat, I want it to be clear that no one should be upset or angry or mad at the Auditor General. She's doing her job. It's her job. The Constitution vests her with the authority to do exactly what she has done, without fear or favor, without regard for anything else but the rules. Mrs. Munroe-Ellis isn't the problem. The rules are. And it's time to change them. Because as I see it, listeners, viewers, Jamaica exists in a unique position, as do most small island developing states. That position makes us susceptible to all kinds of shocks, all kinds of emergencies, climate shocks, climate emergencies, economic shocks, economic emergencies, health shocks. The truth is, we're vulnerable as a state. And that vulnerability means the state has to create rules, laws, that allow it and its agents the room to effectively respond and maneuver in rolling crises. And they are rolling now, think about it. Since 2020, how many serious shocks and crises has the Jamaican state faced? Think about it. From COVID-19 straight come to Melissa. It's just been an avalanche, a cascading sequence of shocks. And the state has had to respond. And it cannot be that we expect the same risk assessment and profile that applies in a normal procurement environment to apply to pandemics, hurricanes, earthquakes, and floods. It can't be, don't make no sense. And while it is true that emergency procurement rules do exist, my understanding of those rules is that it's still a multi-layered proposition that does not create the necessary framework to respond to the unique emergencies we face. So take the procurement of the Starlink devices, for instance, which has been flagged by Mrs. Munroe-Ellis. No reasonable person could argue that they were not absolutely necessary in the telecommunications black hole that swallowed up Western Jamaica in the aftermath of Hurricane Melissa. And I know we like to forget things in this country, and 3 months on, we probably forget how bad it was. I was there 2 days after Melissa passed. And I remember having to stop at one particular spot in St. Elizabeth, just holding up the phone, and I was surrounded by hundreds of people just holding up the phone, trying to make contact. Ton and I were trying to get through to the newsroom to relay information. It was an absolute blackout. So nobody can say it wasn't absolutely necessary to reconnect those people. We can't say that Vaz's intentions were anything but honorable. We couldn't characterize them as anything but honorable. As the Energy and Telecommunications Minister responding in a crisis. And the Auditor General herself does not suggest that he had the very best intentions. But she does find that the rules were breached. And as I was coming and I was reading through, I was saying to myself, does Mark in St. Elizabeth or Don in Westmoreland care about that rule where no impropriety has been found? In other words, a breach of the rules in and of itself without more. Do those people care about that? Or do they care that in the immediate aftermath, swallowed up by a telecommunications black hole, they were able to make contact? I'm willing to bet that they cared that they were able to make contact, far more than they cared that the rule was breached. What they care about is the fact that the state was able to deliver a critical service in the time of a crisis, as it ought to. That is the expectation. You can't tell people who are suffering that there are rules and we have to follow the rules. You can't do that because they'll care very little. And they'll ask the reasonable question: why doesn't the rule allow for proper service delivery, for my government to respond, for my state to respond? And so it seems to me that the rule must be changed. Because accountability is important, it is true. But surely, in the quest for accountability, we have to accept our unique circumstance. And I think if from 2020 to now has taught us anything, it is that there's more to come. There's more to come. And we can't keep going through this horse and pony show. That there's an emergency. The people who are in authority and who are responsible act in a crisis. And people who have had to respond in crisis will tell you, I remember former President George W. Bush, he called it the fog of war. Obviously on 9/11, he faced a much greater crisis, but you get the picture. Just to stay on that example a little while longer, I recall the former vice president, when the White House could not make contact with the commander-in-chief, Bush, because they were busy flying him all over trying to detect what was going to happen and where would be best to save him. And a plane was identified as being on its way to Washington. And they couldn't reach the commander-in-chief, and the Navy asked the vice president, the Air Force rather, asked the vice president, should we shoot it down? And he said it was the most difficult decision he had ever had to make. And he said, yes, shoot it down. A commercial airliner. Again, far different in terms of the scale of the crisis. But you get the picture. It's that leaders have to make decisions in crises that they think is best to secure the best outcome. And that's not always easy. And so the rules have to accommodate those emergencies. So why haven't they changed the rules? Because they're the ones complaining, the policymakers, they're the ones complaining, and they have custody of the rules. They can change them. It's because there are people in this country who posture in a way that suggests that everybody's a thief. And any attempt to make things more efficient means you must be a thief. Nobody wants that. There are people in the media who, I assume, understand, and yet they run headlines and relentless editorials going after public servants for doing their jobs in an environment that's a crisis, that's an emergency. And nobody can credibly or concretely say that there was corruption. But there's this hint, nudge, the innuendo, the speculation, tarnishes people. And so, for example, that's why the civil servants, that's why they want to cross every T and dot every I. And things slow to a crawl. Nothing happens. Because they know that you call them up in front of Parliament and embarrass them. Nobody wants that. The politicians don't want to be called thieves. So they might try, get around the rules so them can, pocket taxpayers' money. They don't want that. But that's the environment that's been created. And so instead of changing the rules to allow the state to properly respond to the emergencies we face, we do nothing. And remember what I said, nothing changes if nothing changes. So civil society watchdogs and the supposed guardians of integrity, they must give reasonable room now, I think, to allow for the crafting of a new framework, an emergency framework that can respond. Because I don't think we should believe that Melissa is the last of it. I don't think so. There'll be more. And there'll be need for more emergency action. So we have to create the room, give the room for it to happen. Yes, a lot of consultation on what it should look like. Absolutely, let's do that. But let's give the room to change those rules. Because it will mean very little if the state has multiple layers of rules and after crossing every T and dotting every I, nothing gets done and people go without, or worse, they die. The government would have failed, all of us would have failed. The Jamaican state and its legitimacy would have failed. Because in that environment, and I've been saying this for a long time, people will lose confidence in the state and its ability to deliver for them. And that is where the bad faith actors, the dons, the pretended strongmen, that's where they'll take hold, and take root. Because if people can't look to the state to provide for them, then they'll look to others. Whether it be for security, whether it be for access to service, whatever it is. If the state can't fill the gap, the vacuum, other people will take the place of the state. And all the advocacy would be for nothing. Okay, you beat your chest, you get the headlines you want, you get the editorials you want, you get the commentators to say what you want. But then what is the long-term effect if there's no delivery of the service and all the rules have been followed? It's a loss of confidence. So politicians must have the courage to start the conversation, and civil society must give the room for it to happen. The modern challenges we face as a country requires a state apparatus that's agile enough to respond and to respond effectively. Nothing changes if nothing changes. So it's time we change something. Let's go for the break. My hands were steady. Calls, I see an item of news that's interesting. Nationwide is reporting that the Member of Parliament for Southwest St. Catherine, Everett Wilmington, has been selected as the new JLP representative on the Electoral Commission of Jamaica to replace Tom Tavares Finson, who retired after a 20-year stint. I think that's an absolutely brilliant choice. Everett Wilmington, being a stickler for rules and also having proposed a private member's motion in the Parliament, which I think was intended to properly update and modernize electoral laws as it relates to what mark should be accepted, and also being consistent on the salaries paid to ECJ commissioners and questioning the logic of the salary. I think he's a good choice. I'd once said, I thought Everett Wilmington would have been a good Speaker of the House. People didn't agree because, they thought he might mouth off in a way that, would complicate the speaker's chair. But I thought he would be a good speaker, a stickler for the rules. He knows the rules, and he always, fairly wants them enforced, no matter who or on what side. So I think that's a good choice, and I hope he takes that same courage and gusto to the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, and hopefully we can get some answers. I too am curious about the salary. I suppose you want them to be insulated in a way that they can't be interfered with, but then these are already people of high repute, So, I don't know. It's $22 million now, something like that they're paid. Yeah, so good luck, Mr. Wilmington. 20 minutes after 10, 630-937-124, 618-6730. Papa Nana, good morning.
Good morning, Ricardo. How you do?
I am all right. How are you?
You know, so I'm blessed this morning, man. The water no cold at all.
Yeah, beard.
Yes, but the water no come back yesterday and gone back again,